A. Um, Justin, thank you so much for meeting with me. I'm so excited to meet with you during Black History Month. This is wonderful, and I know that you're doing cutting edge research in the area of Black fatherhood. So I know a little bit about you, and I have, stalked you on social media before meeting with you. So I have a sense of who you are. But for people that don't know who you are and are listening to this podcast, can you tell them a little bit about yourself and what does it mean to be you?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that, and thank you very much for having me on. Yeah, so I'm a seventh year doctoral candidate at the Crown Family School of Social Work.
You're almost
We,
there. Almost
yeah,
there.
yeah, like literally weeks left. So I'm excited. I before I came to Crown, I was a social worker here in Chicago, and while I was a caseworker, um, a foster care caseworker, I noticed that the foster care, well, the child welfare system and the foster care system struggled to engage black fathers. Um, and being one of the few black males at the agency, it became very apparent to me that um, the the people that I worked with, their inability to engage black fathers was one, a problem that they recognized,
Mm,
but two and three is that the lack of engagement, I think, had to deal a lot with just kind of racialized biases and stereotypes that they held against black fathers. And I should say um, that I observed that in black female workers and also white female workers. And so
wow.
um, there's that. But also the system's general struggle to engage fathers in child welfare services was a problem that um, it was. I don't want to say it was the elephant in the room because we talked about it, but there just really wasn't a good. There wasn't a lot of work being done around that, um, and so that was kind of the big thing. But also while I was working there, I noticed, I had difficulties around a different population of black fathers
Mhm.
involved in the system, and those were young black fathers that were under the care of the foster care system.
Wow.
So there's really no research specifically targeting that population. And so I noticed on my caseload that I had young black dads who the system kind of didn't know how to handle. Like, what was the role in preparing them for fatherhood? Didn't seem like there was a role. And so my research, basically I came up to a point where I was like, I don't know what to do. I had no guidance
Mhm.
on how to serve them.
Mhm.
And there's a professor here at the University of Chicago named Dr. Mark Courtney, who's doing work around transition age foster youth. And so I went to one of his conferences. I went to one of his talks, and I was like, "Hey, man, like I have a lot of young black fathers on my caseload. I don't know how to help them. They seem like they're a unique population." And he was like, "Yeah, they are. Like you should really. There is no research really around that. You should think about getting a PhD and working on that." That was really the kind of first seed for me to do that. And after a couple months of continuing to struggle with it, I was like, "Yeah, I could definitely do some
This,
benefit here." And so,
yeah, this is my area. This is what I'm going to jump
yeah.
into. So I just want to clarify two different things that you said. One was, are you saying that when you were working for CPS, Child Protective Services, that there was a recognition that workers were not engaging Black fathers, but there was no practical kind of breakdown into how to engage fathers into the assessment process? And like, it seems like you were saying, like, everybody recognized there was an issue, but there wasn't really any kind of attempts being made to kind of be more inclusive to them. Is that right?
Yep, that's right.
Yeah.
And really, I think what it boils down to is the guidance that we were given or
Mm.
that was shared with me was very superficial. It was very much like, yeah, we need to include dads. Dads are important in child welfare services, but there were no mechanisms in place to hold me accountable for that, like there were for moms.
Yes.
So like
Yes.
if I went to like whenever I went to court for a permanency hearing, the judge would ask me like, okay, is mom participating in services? Like, what's the return home goal? Like there was a lot of that, and then I would have to say, well, like I also talked to dad, like we're talking about out of home placements for this kid. But like I was talking to dad, and dad, like his mom is a great placement option. He has an
Hmm.
uncle or an
Hmm.
aunt that's a great placement option. So I
Hmm.
would have to kind of bring that up. It was never really um, required of me to do that, like it was for moms.
Justin, that really resonates with one, my own work experience in CPS, right? Like all of the assessment tools that we used, a lot of the interview questions that we were given, the scripts, they all focused on, well, ask mom, blah, blah, blah. Ask mom about the child's routine. Ask mom what type of diapers is, and there was no inclusion of dad in any of the language. Um, and so that what you're talking about really does resonate. And even as I'm a Black woman, I'm married, in my own personal life, I know that when I take my kids to the doctors, oftentimes people are very fixated on, you know what what do you want to do, what works, when's the next appointment going to suit your schedule, like we'll send a summary of the information to your email, but they completely leave my husband out of the equation, and he is a very actively involved hands-on father to our two young children. The other thing that I was thinking about was, I wanted to know if you could speak to this. So help if I'm asking something that's weird, just tell me. But so it feels like a million years ago, but probably 30 years ago, back in the 90s, late 80s, early 90s, there was a lot of there were lots of media stories. There was lots of information out there that basically painted a picture of Black men being deadbeat dads, right? Like they weren't around, they didn't care, they weren't providing for their kids. It was just, Black women were the welfare queens and Black dads were MIA. Has that stereotype changed over the last decade? Is that still true? Or are Black fathers showing up for their children and um, parenting their kids?
Yeah, I think um, I think it matters. It depends on who you talk to,
Mm-hmm.
right? I think generally, if when you talk about black fathers showing up, I mean, black fathers have always shown up,
Yeah.
and just like with when Reagan used the term of the welfare queen with that mom from Chicago who was taking advantage of public aid. You know, I see that reflected a lot in that we, I shouldn't say we, um, researchers, I'm a researcher, so I'm going to put
Right.
myself in the we. Generally, researchers have have had very poor ways of measuring father and what we now call father involvement. Things like
Right.
father engagement, father accessibility, um, father responsibility. And when we had poor ways of measuring that, we were using methods that I think um, some may associate with kind of white European families. And so when we would go in a home to do any type of research around fathers, it would be around a married father that was in the home. Well,
Yes.
fatherhood is a lot more complex than that. Um, and this goes across the board, across the kind of racial spectrum. A father does not need to be in the home. A father doesn't need to be married for them to be involved in the lives of their children. So I think when we
Mm-hmm.
use diverse forms, diverse methods, and when we have diverse kind of theoretical constructs of what we call father involvement, that matters. The same thing with child support. Um, Historically, people have used like the contributions of fathers financially to their children. When we look at child support, that's not always picked up in kind of child support that may be given directly to the mother, directly uh,
Right.
to the kid when they purchase clothing or diapers and things like that, and give it to the mom. That may not be picked up in child support systems.
Hmm.
So that's a kind of roundabout way to respond to your question. But to directly respond to it, yes, I think that um, the kind of the dominant. I think that people look at black fathers. I shouldn't say people. I think historically, the way in which we've racialized black fathers, people will find anomalies. They will find the the a poor example of fatherhood and say, yeah, that's how
Hmm.
black fathers are. And
Mm.
that's clearly not the case when you look across the spectrum.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so important what you're talking about. What else do you wish that people understood about Black fatherhood, about Black men who are fathers?
I would want people to understand that they are a highly involved subpopulation of fathers. We have, and there's even research evidence that demonstrates that black fathers among racial groups tend to be the group of fathers that are most involved in the lives of their children.
Wow. Wow.
And
Wow.
I'm not talking about just some like little sample of like 25 fathers. I'm talking like national studies, some of them federal, that show father involvement among black fathers has been the highest form. And I think that among black families, that is that finding is not surprising at all.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think that when most people hear that, they often have had this negative image of black fatherhood. And to be honest, when I first started in the case, when I first started as a caseworker, that is, I held some of those ideas. I was just from what I learned in my MSW program, from what I learned from caseworkers I was working with, they were telling me like, yeah, black fathers and that in the child welfare system tend to be not involved. Um, and so I came into it kind of with that idea in my mind, and
Mm-hmm.
I should have known better, but I was
Mm-hmm.
still a little bit shocked and surprised when I actually made the effort to go out and talk to those dads.
Yes.
That those dads were like, "You are the first person from the child welfare system that's engaged with me in this way. That
Yes.
wasn't engaging with me in a negative way, like I was harmful or like I was a liability to the family."
Exactly.
And I would
Yeah.
ask them questions that to me seemed like very basic questions, like, "Hey, when was the last time you talked to your daughter? When was the last time that you got to see her? Like, just so you know, like you have a right to see them." And a lot of stuff I was telling them was the first time that they were engaged in a meaningful way. And in my dissertation research, my dissertation was on young black fathers in foster care. Um, you know, when I was revising my study, some people said like it may be difficult for you to engage with them. And in young black, young youth are difficult to engage with because they have way better things to do
Right.
than you talking to a researcher.
Right.
Some of them are to be expected. Um, like they've got a life to live, but also like they're working, they're in school, they're taking care of their kids, and so. Oh, sorry. Speaking about
It's
taking care of
okay.
my kids, that was my alarm that to get my kids from the bus stop. Um, but just speaking with these dads, they were sometimes I can't get them off the phone. Like they're like, I'm so happy someone's talking to me about fatherhood because no one in my life has
Right.
really talked to me about this.
Right. Right. And again, I sound like a broken record. I just want to say that resonates with my experience in CPS. And I was definitely told when I was coming through CPS, like Black dads are not involved or they're aggressive and you should be afraid. And it took me a while to really um, seek out ways in which to involve them in the ways in which they could be involved. It took, I think I had this, it was this unspoken reality that was being passed along to all the workers, that like Black dads don't have an opinion on what happens with their kids. So there's no point asking them. Like they don't have an opinion on contact. They don't have an opinion on like what Christmas presents the kids should get, or whether or not they should be able to go to the barber shop and get their hair cut. Like Black dads don't care. So you might as well just save your time and not even ask them. And as soon as I began to deconstruct that assumption, I was so blown away. And again, resonates with what you just said about how much it meant to these Black fathers to be asked, to be included, to be given copies of minutes of meetings, or to be, told what the court date was. Um, and I think to treat them with some modicum of dignity and respect and inclusion was so powerful. So that definitely resonates in what you're saying.
Yeah, in what you just said, I would get that a lot from caseworkers too. Like, when I would um, when I first came and I was assigned cases, or child welfare, there's a lot of turnover, and
Yes.
so if I absorbed a case, when I would meet with the caseworker about that case, for that kind of like transitional um, conversation about, tell me about the family, like what's up, like what do I need to expect, what should I do? I got those similar things, and I think, and especially in a field like child welfare, where we have a very short period of time. Like
Hmm.
we have to do a home visit in an hour, and more often than not, that is our only visit of the month, or probably our second one. And so in that hour, we have a lot to do, and so you know, I think the same goes for kind of case planning. We are expected to do case planning with children and moms,
Hmm.
and I mean, and fathers on paper, but in reality, fathers are often, and research is consistent with this, that fathers are left out of case planning. Um, and I think that caseworkers, they're already so stressed, they're already up against a bunch of time
Right.
constraints, that they say things like, "Yeah, I don't think that the father's going to want has that much to contribute," because they don't want to actually go do the work of
Right.
engaging with that father. And in really, I mean, in my experience, when I engaged with fathers, it's been amazing. Yes, it took more work, but it wasn't more work because he was a father or because he was a male. It took more work because I had to engage with another
Hmm.
parent.
Hmm.
And unfortunately, when there's time constraints and one parent kind of has to go as the focus, it's usually the dad, and that will continue to be reinforced until child welfare attorneys, judges, um, administrative case reviewers ask questions about dads, until there's a mechanism in place where people have to respond, and demonstrate that they're engaging fathers. I just feel like that's going to continue to happen.
That level of accountability. Well, that's a very nice segue into like my next question, which is um, what thinking about policy. Okay, so like on a policy level, what would change look like for Black fathers in a way that is uplifting them, or that is enhancing their quality of life? And it could be with any kind of policy, contact arrangements or child support payments or whatever. But what would you do if you had a magic wand and you could enact a new policy today that was going to benefit Black dads? What would that look like, or what would you try to tackle?
I think the a policy that I think for me it would be a policy that um, acknowledged the strengths of Black fatherhood and acknowledged the
Yes.
rich traditions in the Black community of self-help and mutual aid. And so when we talk about Black fatherhood, um, you know, we also have to acknowledge that there's strong Black paternal family members too.
Come through.
That
Yes. This
that
expanded understanding of fathering, right? Like it doesn't just mean that you have a biological child, right?
right, right.
Right.
And so I think taking a strength-based approach and acknowledging that Black fathers have a lot to contribute to their children. Um, Also, in the co-parental relationship. So just overall kind of child and family outcomes, overall health and well-being,
Mm-hmm.
but also looks at, and so a strength-based approach, yes, but also looks at uh, a subpopulation of fathers that has had a pretty horrendous history of racism and discrimination,
Yes.
and looking at how racism and discrimination affects a black father, may affect a black father's ability to be the type of parent that they want to be, whatever
Mm,
that looks like to them. And so I think any policy would recognize that a one size fits all approach will not be sufficient. That fatherhood looks different to different fathers. Black fathers are going to have needs that are going to differ from other racial groups, but also black fathers are not a monolithic group. They're going to have needs that differ from other black fathers. And so
mm-hmm.
I know that's difficult to do with policy, but I just think a policy that acknowledges that fatherhood is a lot more diverse than historically we have grown to know it. But in terms of black fathers, that uh, racism, discrimination, marginalization,
Yes.
oppression
Yes.
has real world consequences in the
Yes.
father's ability to financially support their children, emotionally support their children. I mean, it's, for example, young men in my dissertation study, they discuss the ways in which the fear of police affects their fatherhood. And they almost have this type of stoicism about them. Stoicism in the sense that they make comments about, I hug my child or I kiss my child every time because I don't know if I will see them the next
Right.
day. And
Right.
that's a very stoic approach
Yes.
to fatherhood that's, I think, different than other racial groups.
Yes. Yes. Oh my gosh, Justin, that was so rich. There was so much in what you just said. I think the connection that I was making in my head as you were speaking was thinking a lot about the journey of becoming a parent and how that journey has looked for Black families. So Black women, obviously during slavery, they were they were having babies, but they weren't always allowed to parent their babies. When I teach classes, I try to get my students to understand that it's only been relatively recent that Black women have had they've been allowed the responsibility to care for their children. They've been allowed the agency and the autonomy to make decisions for their kids. That there was a period of, after slavery, and you're dealing with Jim Crow, where there was forced sterilizations, where Black women's children were being removed by social workers, where they were being placed with white families, they were being, part of indentured servitude, and that history is also shared with Black fathers. And then you factor in, you know, the crack epidemic, mass incarceration, and how like generations of Black men being taken out of the community and unable to parent their children. So I almost feel this protectiveness when I talk to students about the needs of Black families, because I'm trying to get them to understand we really haven't had a moment as a community to just breathe and try to imagine, what do we want parenting our children to look like. We haven't been afforded that, like, a pause in the oppression, in the violence, in the racism, in the discrimination, in the prejudice, in the bigotry, to be able to even kind of get an idea, a vision for, like, what does parenting even look like. And so if I, as a Black woman, am trying to figure out how to parent my kids, and I've only been allowed to parent my kids for maybe the last like 70 years, maybe at a push,
Mm-hmm.
Black men have had even less time really to think about what what is a good father? What does fathering even mean? Like, what do I want this to look like? What do I want my legacy to be? Um, so that was super rich what you're talking about. The other thing that I had a question about, and I'd love, this is kind of out in left field, but I would love your opinion on it, is thinking back to like when we were kids growing up and you had like Family Matters, and we had the Cosby Show, and we had like all these shows showing like Black dads. And I feel like now when I look around at how the media portrays Black fatherhood, there seems to be a real gap. There seems to be an absence that maybe wasn't there in the 90s. I don't know if you would agree with me or not, but I think about like we have Blackish, right? So we have Anthony Anderson. Um, but there's not very many other pictures of like an involved Black father that is kind of in mainstream media. Would you agree with that? Do you think that the narrative around Black fatherhood has changed in terms of how the media is shaping Black fatherhood?
Yeah, I do. And I think that's largely been outside of the Black family. And what I mean by that is, yeah, you raised a number of great points on how, as researchers or maybe even like historians have kind of failed to account for Black fatherhood um, from Africa um,
Mm-hmm.
through being forcibly removed, through slavery, through Reconstruction. Um, we may not have a good history of that, but during that whole time, Black fatherhood was happening, right?
Yes,
And
yes.
just because we don't understand it, um, I mean, I don't know what that means to Black families.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the 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 ways in which Black fathers are portrayed in media, I don't know how much that really means to Black families because Black families through that whole time have had highly involved, engaged, loving, caring, warm Black fathers. And
Yes.
just because historians may not have been able to track it, just because researchers haven't been able to research it, and because media hasn't been able to make money off of it, doesn't mean that it has not been there. It's been there.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
Mm-hmm.
but to bring that to your point um, about the media portrayals of Black fathers, yeah, um, for the past 7 years of my dissertation work, I haven't been watching that much TV.
Yeah.
Um, so
I can
it's
imagine.
so I can't really comment on that. But this is one thing that I can say. When it comes to where fathers in general learn about fatherhood from, it's something that I'm looking into in my dissertation research. Because in my dissertation research, Black fathers that are in foster care have been removed from their families, and so they are now it's called corporate parenting. It's when an institution takes over the role of parenting and then divides that parental task among a bunch of different people. So an institution steps in for the role in the role of parenting. And so what I look
Right.
at in my dissertation research is, okay, we know that fathers often learn how to be fathers. Um, one theory is that fathers learn how to be fathers from their fathers.
Right.
So, what's that look like when a youth has been removed and now is learning about fatherhood under a state institution? And so I've been doing research on that, and I think what I've come up with today. I'm currently working on this chapter, but I think it applies to what you're saying is we learn about fatherhood from in a bunch of different ways. One theory of it is this kind of like symbolic interaction, in that
Mm-hmm.
I learn about fatherhood I can learn about it from my wife, from my partner, from my mother, from my uncle, in how as a father I may parent my child in a way that is either accepted or rewarded by the people around me. And
Yeah.
so I think that's a long-winded way of saying yes, I think Black fathers can learn about how to be a good Black father from their Black fathers, from other parenting Black men in their lives, in the same way that they can learn about it from their Black mothers, from their Black sisters, their Black aunts.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that as a Black community, we don't have to rely on Black fathers in the media to teach us about the importance of Black family life
Yes.
and Black parenthood. And so, in that regard, I kind of don't care about media portrayals of Black fathers, especially when those portrayals are more likely than not being the people making profits from it are not us.
Hello. Uh-oh. Uh-oh.
So when that's the case, but also I think there's a real concern if we're leaning on those images of Black fatherhood. I am concerned about what those portrayals look like and what
Hmm.
kind of racist ideologies, discriminatory practices, ideas, behaviors are being channeled through those depictions.
Right. Right. That totally makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. I appreciate your candor in answering that question. What do you, this is my last question for you, so we can keep to time, but what do you feel like, if you were going to summarize Black fathers and their needs, what do Black fathers need? And how can Black women in particular support and empower Black fathers?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah.
Um, I'll answer it the best I can
Okay.
the way that I think of it. I think what Black fathers need is the is the space and time and understanding to be the types of fathers that they want to be.
Mm,
Um, when it comes to Black women, I think that here's where I struggle. Here's where I struggle with this. Okay,
yes. Yes.
because ultimately what we're talking about is the Black family,
Hmm.
and we have roles in that family um, that I think center on what is in the best interest of the child and what is in the best interest of the kind of um, overall well-being of the family,
Hmm.
right? And so I think there's aspects of fatherhood that Black women are doing, and I mean, if you want to look at, like, let's just use kind of gendered, let's use historically kind of gendered ideas and norms that I don't necessarily agree with now, but there's there's parts of Black motherhood that fathers can do. There's parts of Black fatherhood that mothers do, and I think what fathers need is, here we go, I've got it. What Black fathers need is for people to understand that they are a valuable asset to the family.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I think that Black women have always understood that. And I think that um, that Black women should continue to advocate on behalf of the Black fathers in their lives. Um, and I think that one thing that Black women can do is find ways to engage Black fathers in ways that institutions have historically excluded them. For example, ensuring that Black women are making doctor's appointments, um, um, school appointments, um, and at times where fathers can participate as
Yes.
well. And so when they go in there, it's a united front. And when Black women, in virtue of being a woman, uh, doctors, educators are going to go directly to the mom more likely than not. And for Black women to say, well, dad is right here, ask dad.
Mm, mm.
And so,
Justin, I love it.
thank you.
I cannot tell, like, inside I feel like I'm lit up like a Christmas tree. So not to talk over you, but just to say, like, again, in my own life, a great example is my son had a parent teacher conference last week, right? And so we got the invite, the text message from the teacher, and she was like, go on, click on this link and you can sign up on Sign Up Genius. And I was like, fine. So I picked 6 o'clock on a Friday. That's what I picked. So they had early release the week of parent teacher conferences. And so my son came home super early from school, and I got a text from his teacher the day of his conference at like 2:30. And she said, well, we've got a gap. Like I've got a gap of time. I don't have any appointments until yours at 6. Could we do it at 3? And I said, no, my husband's not off work until 4:30. Like he can't. No, I know that it's inconvenient. I know you don't want to be at work until 6 o'clock on us, but in order for my husband to be a part of this and for him to be able to give you input that's really valuable about how our son's developing, we need to both of us be there, right? And so that, like, I feel so affirmed in that decision, because I know I could feel the pushback from the teacher, kind of like, oh, I just want to go home.
Yeah.
But it's really important that my husband be able to be included and be engaged with, and be able to give his perspective on how our little boy is developing and what his needs are, because we're not a monolith, and because I'm not the only expert on our child. So I love what you just said. It was amazing.
Thank you. And to that point, I think that just a couple of quick things to acknowledge. One is that mothers don't always know everything. And so it's great to have the other parent there to also comment on their observations. But two, when I talk about, making sure that the child's father is there at appointments, for the kid and things like that. I don't care if you're a married couple. I don't care if you're separated, living in different homes and co-parenting. But a father is the other parent and deserves every right to be there. And to your point, so I get that all the time. Like I'll show up to my kid's appointment and the doctor wants to know, like, okay, like, are we waiting for mom? It's like, no, I'm here.
Hi.
Like, yeah,
Parental
and
responsibility is present, right?
yeah, and I think as being a fatherhood researcher, I recognize that stuff all the time, and it gets annoying and tiring. And I've got no doubt on that there's some fathers that try and just continue to bump up against those barriers, and just are it's enough to push them out of the picture,
Yes.
and then it becomes a way that we um, that we that we gender parenting,
Mm-hmm.
and that because the mother is a female, she's the only one that will know the kid's developmental needs. This is the only parent that can provide kind of like love and support, and
Justin,
that's
you
clearly not the case.
preach, just preach, brother, preach. Yes. Dads know their kids' shoe size. Dads know their kids' clothing size. Dads know the Medicaid. Like my husband does everything for our kids when it comes to medicine. I know the names of the medicine because I have it written down in like the diaper bag, but I'm not the one who's giving them medicine. I'm trying to, like do some stuff on Google in the evening. I'm not trying to hand out medicine. So it's just so interesting, like how we construct these different roles, and we construct different expectations. And so yes and amen to everything you just said.
Thank you.
That was brilliant. Like that really resonates with me, and I'm sure it will resonate with the people listening to this podcast. That yeah, I was hesitant in asking you that question because I don't want it to seem like Black women are trying to parent Black men, Black fathers. Like Black fathers don't need Black women's permission or help. Like they're doing it.
Hmm.
It's a question of how can we better get out of the way and empower and uplift and encourage Black dads in what they're doing, because I think so much of what Black fathers do is unseen and unacknowledged, either because it falls outside of what is Eurocentric, or because people just don't recognize it as a real offering, right?
Yeah, and to that point, um, there's I recently had a conversation with this researcher. His name is Dr. Mark Trahan, and we were talking about this idea around fatherhood and fathering.
Mm,
And oftentimes, when we try to discuss the ways in which we measure fatherhood, they tend to be actions, right? Like they tend to be the provision of care, the provision of financial resources, spending time with the kid, doing activities with the kid, but also, this conversation that I had with Dr. Trahan was we were we both talk about fatherhood all the time. We're good friends. When we talk about research, we're talking about fatherhood. When we talk to each other just as friends to vent, we're talking about fatherhood.
hmm
So even thinking about fatherhood, that's an action of fatherhood. And
hmm
it's interesting because in my dissertation research, when I talk to these young fathers, I'm astounded by how much they talk about them just thinking about their kids, and they report doing it a lot. So that's something that we can't really measure that
hmm
unless we talk to the dads about
hmm
about that. And so that's also fatherhood and fathering, and I think that's important. But I do want to say one other thing
Yeah.
about Black fatherhood that I think often gets missed when we talk about it. Just like we can't talk about Black fathers as a monolithic group based on kind of racial identity, but also the age of the father matters a lot. And so, you know, um, we often hold expectations of fatherhood, like being able to financially support a child, being able to make decisions that are in the best interest of the child, being able to meet a child's developmental needs. We hold those same expectations to younger fathers when younger Black fathers are still in the process of kind of trying to manage that stuff on their own.
Right.
And um, and so I think, and I don't really know what that means yet, but I think what I can say is that Black fathers that are younger have a different set of have a kind of a similar set of obstacles and struggles as older fathers do, but they are emerging into fatherhood at a period in their life when they're also emerging into adulthood. And
Yes.
there is during that process, it's a different set of obstacles and struggles and barriers that I think we need to look more at. And there's tons of research by Dr. Waldo Johnson at the University of Chicago SSA that looks at kind of adolescent
Yeah.
fatherhood.
Yes.
But I think in the terms of Black fatherhood, um, we need, I think, seasoned fathers, older fathers, and the capacity that they have to help and support young Black fathers. Um, I'd like to see some additional efforts around being made around that.
I love it. That, yeah, the competing priorities that fatherhood and then adulthood, and it all converges on a person, and they're supposed to make sense of, um, yeah, and having older fathers that maybe could mentor, offer advice, encourage along the way, that shepherd these young men through this process, that would be invaluable. I love that. Thank you for lifting that up and for making that plain for everyone. um, we are at time. I want to honor your time. I know that you've got stuff that you're doing, and I know that you're working hard on that dissertation. So I just want to say, like, best of luck. I'm cheering for you, Justin. You're going to do it. Come on, Doc. You got this. You got a couple more weeks, right? And then you're done.
Couple more weeks.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Well, I can't wait to celebrate when you have crossed that finish line. And I cannot wait to have you back when we can then say, Dr. Harty, what do you think about blah blah blah? But I would love to have you come back and share more about your research and the journey that you continue to be on. So thank you so much for your time and your insight and everything that you've brought to the table. There's a lot to kind of dissect and think about going forward.
Of course, thank you so much for having me, and I really appreciate the network you've all put together and what you're doing, and I'm absolutely honored to be part of it.
Thank you so much, Justin. Take care.